Hey everyone, welcome back. Matthew Harris here. I'm really excited today to share with you a piece of original work by one of my favorite blacksmiths of all time. That is Edgar Brandt. He was a super prolific blacksmith back in the 20s in France, and this happens to be an original cast bronze railing panel from the Bon Marché department store in Paris, France. I think originally first installed in 1925. Eventually it was removed and all of these panels were sold at auction, which is where our client got this. And so we are happy to be repurposing this beautiful railing panel into a console table. Our customer has an extensive collection of art and sculpture, so this will now be repurposed into a table to hold some of his sculpture collection. We are honored to be doing this reproduction, recreation of this table for him. Now, I went back to the original design of the railing, and I could see that when these panels were installed in the Bon Marché department store, there were some curved panels that wrapped around the corners. Those may have been cast bronze as well, but Brandt was a very prolific blacksmith. He had literally hundreds of artisans and blacksmiths working for him. He did this same stylized flower scroll and leaf motif several times in forged iron. So we're going to kind of borrow from that, blend the two, and what we're going to do is forge the same flower scrolls and leaves to wrap both of these corners. You can see we already have this panel mounted into the framework of this table, but in this video I'll also go back and show you how we made up this framework. Every square inch of it has been textured. When we first got the original cast panel, it was bolted into two bars like this, which I assume were original from the railing. We still saved those so that if this ever wanted to be bolted back into that to return it to 100% original state, it could be. But we've textured lightly all of the bars. We're adding some swelled feet as the feet that will eventually go under this. But anyhow, it's a really awesome project by one of my favorite blacksmiths of all time, Edgar Brandt. I'm going to show some photos of his work in here as well so that you all get a real good feel for the beauty, quality, and execution of his work. And we are, again, very honored and proud to be repurposing this beautiful railing panel for this console table. Check this project out. Thanks for being here. We began by texturing all of the bars gently on the power hammer to give them a nice forged texture. Once that was done, we started by bending the top and bottom bars, which had to exactly mirror one another with a jig on the table. So we set some backstops, and by doing that we were able to control the bends and keep them exactly the same. Once it bends though, the inside corner of the radius tends to become a little bit thicker and upset slightly. So we will then take the bent bar over to the large straightening anvil that I showed in a few videos back, and we'll take a giant flatter and hit it and flatten it out and take some of that upset and just true the bar up to make sure it's all exactly on the same plane. This 1,800-pound I-beam just acts as an awesome flattening anvil, and it paired with this huge flatter I got from my friend Chris is just an amazing setup for truing up and flattening bars. So again, the top and bottom have to perfectly mirror one another, so we begin by bending one side and then setting a stop, figuring out the calculation of how much material was used to both get them to mirror one another and make sure that the outside dimension was correct for what we had decided with our customer. I think it was 56 inches in this case. And once both bars were bent, we laid them on top of one another and checked them out, and they were exact within about a 1/16 of an inch, which is really good for forged work like this. Again, this anvil and this flatter, just an amazing way to true up and flatten these bars. Really great setup. To make the feet for the bottom of the table, we did a selective heat on the induction. You can see it's a little bit cooler on the ends. And then by pressing it under the 200-ton press, this caused the middle of the bar to swell out more than the ends and just create a nice little swell detail. We did a couple different tries, as you'll see here in a minute, to just get that swell exactly right for this table. And look at this. We did these 3 test pieces, and the first one we did was 3 inches, which was way too much. We dropped back to 2.5 inches for that one. Then we tried 2 5/8, and this guy is 2 9/16. But it's hard to believe there's that much of a difference just from 1/16 more and 1/8 more. Which do you like best, 1, 2, or 3? Once the top and bottom bars of the table were even, we then trimmed them to size for the depth of the table, which is 12 inches. Cut both at the same time to make sure they were exactly the same. And then we jigged up the original panel bolted into our new forged bars on the table. This took a bit of time to get everything square and true, but once it was all bolted up, Jared then began to TIG weld these together. Now, with a table like this, historic context is so important, and Brandt in his work used prolifically the oxyacetylene torch, which was a fairly new technology at the time. It was a very precise and beautiful way of putting a relatively small weld to hold things together. What we're using in this case is a TIG torch, which is just very similar. It's just instead of using gas, we're using gas and electricity, to weld this together. But it's a very similar process, definitely appropriate for this style of piece, and it's the only way that we're going to weld this piece together. But look at that great patina on this, and Jared is cleaning up the ends that he welded. The good boys are in their happy place, and they'll be home soon. Now we're going to get into forging the stylized flower scrolls and leaves, and I will also show a bit more of this in part 2 of this table. But Jared here is taking 1/4 inch by 1.25 inch stock and hammering a long, graceful taper into it, which will become the entire scroll. So it's very important that as he hammers that down, that he goes back and works the thickness of the bar back to being true, so that when we scroll this around, it forms uniformly and in a really beautiful spiral. This is a Champion power hammer that he's using to hammer this out on. It's a fantastic machine, originally patented it in 1902. Still in use in our studio. Once the taper is complete, I bring it over to the 200-ton press and a custom die that I welded up The goal here is to press in the flower petal-like lobes in one consistent shot, but that also causes the bar to swell out, as you can see once I turn it sideways, and then it gets pressed flat to remove some of that and again bring it all back to a consistent thickness, and then it's pressed straight one final time. I made up a custom die for the 35-pound Bulldog style air hammers that we've made and featured in a couple videos. And this was used to hammer in a texture into only about half of the bar. I'll show a close-up of this die, as you can see here, but the texture only comes about halfway across the bar, and it's just that same kind of linear style texture that you see so often in Art Deco work. But this hammer was amazing for using this, quick little custom die that we made. Again, it's so important in blacksmithing to be efficient in tooling. Now here we are doing the handwork of scrolling up these flower-like scrolls, and they begin truly by hand, just by hammering the end of the scroll over the anvil to create a graceful start for these scrolls. Now, to do these flower scrolls, they wound up being some of the most complex scrolls I've ever done, in the sense of we bend them with the wide part of the scroll out, and we call that in blacksmithing bending on the hard part. So it's the part that the material wants to bend the least. So we made a fairly complicated scroll tool that was a spiral, but also kind of had like an anvil that spiraled that we could form the scroll against as we formed it down. This became a largely two-man operation. Jared worked with me on this to pinch the scroll to start and keep it from slipping. And then beyond that, we made a special tool that put some leverage down and kind of clamped the scroll once it was halfway done. But you can see as I'm pulling it around, I'm pulling really hard to stretch the flower out and make sure it doesn't get any kinks, but I'm also forging it flat with the hammer because it really wants to cup dramatically as we pull it around, and we want it to stay fairly flat. It'll get slight cupping on the final form, but that's done very deliberately. And also, we're working two bars at the same time in the gas forge. I left this portion of the video kind of real time to show just the actual labor that goes into this portion of it. Again, you can see I'm just hammering that flat against the quote-unquote anvil part of that scroll tool. That scroll tool really looks like a snail, much more than any other scroll tool that we've ever made. But yeah, Jared's clamping with that kind of modified bending fork, and that gives me the ability, again, I'm pulling really hard to keep this from kinking, and just working it, flat and efficient around. I was explaining to Jared there, how much I was pulling against it to keep it from kinking, because where every petal segments and divides, it kind of wants to create a slight kink there. So by pulling hard, and in this case, what I'm doing is I'm actually hammering that little kink out sideways, just using some hand hammer techniques. A lot of handwork in doing this, but sometimes the best blacksmithing is handwork. You see a ton of power hammer use on this channel, but in this project we did a ton of handwork on it, and it always shows in the final result. What you could see me doing there is spreading out the leaves of the flower scroll by hammering them sideways a bit. And this is just all the work it takes to finish and true these scrolls up. Here is also a close-up look at that scroll tool and the snail-like pattern that we needed to form these scrolls. Well, as we wrap up part 2 on the Edgar Brandt console table, I'd like to share with you 2 other fun little tables that we are just doing some very minor repairs and tune-up work to. But these are also from the same customer, bought in Paris. And these are original 1920s radiator covers. How cool is this? This little curved door for accessing the valve on the radiator for adjusting the temperature of the hot water. This one also has the same thing, access to the radiator right here. But I just wanted to show these off because they're such beautiful original 1920s samples. So I'm just going to take some simple video of them showing this beautiful hammered texture in this piece. This is a little cast bronze panel on either side of this one. But it's just beautiful how they acetylene welded everything together, just like I was talking about earlier on the video of Brandt and how he used oxyacetylene welding. Today we use the modern equivalent of that, which is TIG welding. But that was prolific, often done back in the 20s. This has some bolted connections here. But both of these pieces feature classic Art Deco styling in the design, and then just great execution with simple textures added and just beautiful. So as we close out this video, I just want to share some simple video of this and hope you all enjoy this look at 2 fairly rare tables that again are being repurposed into sculpture stands, sculpture tables. Now I'm trying to capture this just right in the light where you can see this great hammered texture in this old radiator cover. This very stylized linear hammer pattern is something that was quite common in Art Deco work by numerous French blacksmiths. It's something that we did as a signature texture into a oval table that we did with my friend David Kahn from Moreland Studios years ago. That table featured a awesome gilded finish, was just fantastic, as you can see here in some photos of the finished product. But we love Art Deco work. What an honor to be asked to work on this original Brandt piece. And anytime we're asked to do Art Deco work, we love the opportunity. As always, thank you for joining me, and we hope to catch you on the next one.